My defining moment was Christmas 1999. Now to understand some of my story, I think you kind of have to go back to the beginning. I grew up in a single-parent home. It was always just me and my mom growing up, and we were always very close. She was wanting to be a stay-at-home mom, and she wanted to be around me, but she also wanted to have a successful business and be able to provide for our family. And so what she did is she created her own business where we would travel all over the country and teach people how to play piano. And so if you can imagine this, we have this big, RV kind of motorhome thing, and we would pack 100 small Casio, Toys R Us type pianos in the bottom of it. And we'd go all over the country, and she would set up, and for a couple hundred people, she would teach them how to play piano. And at the same time, as we were doing this whole business thing, she found time to be involved in all the things that I cared about as well. And so I remember she got me this little wiffle ball bat, and she got me a little wiffle ball, and so I'd go outside and just throw it up and hit it on my own. And I'll never forget the day, I was pretty young. She came out in a big baseball jersey. And if you can imagine this, the 80s, big poofy curly hair, walked out with that and a fitted hat on top of it. And she came out and she was gonna pitch to me so that, I could learn how to hit. But by the time I got to middle school, she had been feeling not well. She hadn't been feeling well, and she had kind of chalked it up to maybe it was the flu, or she just wasn't, she wasn't doing well. And I remember she dropped me off at school one day, and I was there throughout the day. And about midway through, right around lunchtime, I get a call that said, "Hey, you're gonna get picked up early from school." And I remember going down to the office. I had my big book bag on, and I saw her there, and it looked like she was pretty upset. And so we got in the car, and we drove probably 2 blocks after that. And in the car, it was just silent. She hadn't said really anything, and I didn't really talk much. And we got to a red light, and there was nobody around. And at that point, she just breaks down and she starts crying. And she said, "Patrick, I was just diagnosed with cancer today." And she kept talking from that moment on. But I mean, you know this, if you've ever had news like that, you don't really hear anything after the word cancer. There was nothing else that really popped up for me. I just remember an overwhelming amount of emotion that flooded me all at the same time. As a kid growing up, in a single parent home, I would have men say, "You're the man of the house. You need to, you take care of your mom." In some ways, I feel like I was stone-faced, kind of receiving everything that she was saying. And feeling like I wanted to let it all out, but that I couldn't. And so trying to be like whatever this man of the house thing is, I remember leaning over and giving her a hug. And when I gave her a hug, for the first time that I could ever remember, feeling like I was lying to my mom, saying, "It's all gonna be okay." And what happened over the next couple of days really feels like a whirlwind. We found out that day, and then 2 days later, she was in surgery. And so they did the surgery. I stayed at a friend's house, and the surgery went really, really great. Everything was successful with the surgery, but there was a long recovery period that was coming up next. Because she had been so successful in her business, we lived in a large home. We had a lot of things. I had, the basketball goal that I always wanted. I had everything that I could have ever wanted. And within about a 6-month period, because of some of the bills that we had, we lost really everything that we had. And we got to the place where we found out that we were gonna lose our home. At the time where we didn't know what we were gonna do, we didn't have family around. It was just me and her. Somebody from our church reached out, and they said, "Hey, we've got this really small apartment, and if you guys want to live in it for the next, 6 months or 9 months until you get back on your feet, you certainly can do that." We went over to this apartment, and we unloaded everything. My mom was still really weak through this recovery process and still not feeling, up to speed. And we got everything in the apartment, and then for the next several months after that, I think we were just kind of living. It felt like one big blur. Our lives were extraordinarily different. My mom was still recovering and struggling through how to navigate that. She wasn't working at the time, and we had been living in some ways off of our savings during this point. I'd go to school and then come back, and when I came back, the rest of my evening was in some ways trying trying to take care of her and do that. So towards the end of this year, we were coming up on Christmas time, and growing up, Christmas was always a really big deal at our house. My mom she would decorate the whole house. I mean, she would have the most amazing tree. She'd be up on a ladder, nailing lights in and, doing the whole thing. And it was always a big deal for us. But coming up on this Christmas, I mean, obviously we were going to experience something that was very different. So early December, we were at our house, and it was around dinner time that night, and there's a knock at the door. And as soon as I opened the door, there were these 5 women that were standing there, and they just started like screaming and Merry Christmas and all of that sort of thing. They had on Santa hats and the ugliest Christmas sweaters that I think you could ever imagine. And they were all carrying these presents and lights and decorations. And in that moment, it hit me. They were here to decorate our house. They were here to give us gifts. They were here to make Christmas happen in some ways for us. After we opened the door and we see these women standing there, turning around and seeing my mom behind me. And what she was feeling in that moment was just this overwhelming joy and thankfulness. And it was something that I hadn't seen in her in a very long time. And it was something that I had been praying for, that I had been hoping for, and hoping that God would allow us to experience, during Christmas that year. The crazy thing, it wasn't that it happened in this miraculous way. It wasn't happening in the ways that I expected. That joy that was happening in that moment was made possible because of these 5 women in my mom's small group who showed up on our behalf to give us something that we could have never given ourselves. I'll never forget opening the door and seeing Rose and seeing Michelle and seeing Karen all standing there. And I don't think they had any idea just how much they were giving us, but it was in that moment that we felt so extraordinarily loved and reminded that we weren't alone and that God was with us. And ultimately, they gave us a gift that we could have never given ourselves.